Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the final episode of the Graveyard Book. Tonight we'll be reading chapter 8. Chapter 7 was a doozy. It was a long one and a lot happened. Bod found out uh, about the Jack of all trades, a secret organization of mages or wizards. Goes back thousands of years. He also found out that he is the prophesized legend that can go between the worlds of the living and the dead. He had a showdown with the man who killed his parents and won by summoning the Sleer and letting the man fall into the Sleer's trap. But it cost him. He lost his friend Scarlet, and she was frightened of him and took off. But Silas came back. He helped him get through it a little bit and took him out for pizza afterwards. So now we are on chapter 8, final chapter called Leavings and Partings. Let's get into it. Sometimes he could no longer see the dead. It had begun a month or two previously, in April or in May. At first, it only happened occasionally, but now it seemed to be happening more and more. The world was changing. Bod wandered over to the northwestern part of the graveyard, to the tangle of ivy that hung from a yew tree and half blocked the far exit from the Egyptian walk. He saw a red fox and a large black cat with a white collar and paws, who sat conversing together in the middle of the path. At Bod's approach, they looked up, startled, and fled into the undergrowth, as if they had been caught conspiring. Odd, he thought. He had known that fox since it had been a cub, and the cat had prowled through the graveyard for as long as Bod could remember. They knew him. If they were feeling friendly, they even let him pet them. Bod started to slip through the ivy, but he found his way blocked. He bent down, pushed the ivy out of the way, and squeezed through. He walked down the path carefully, avoiding the ruts and holes until he reached the impressive stone that marked the final resting place of Alonso Tomas Garcia Jones. Traveler, lay down thy staff. Bod had been coming down here every few days for several months. Alonso Jones had been all over the world, and he took great pleasure in telling Bod stories of his travels. He would begin by saying, "Nothing interesting has ever happened to me." Then he would add gloomily, "And I have told you all my tales." And then his eyes would flash, and he would remark, "Except, did I ever tell you about whatever the next words were, the time I had to escape from Moscow, or the time I lost an Alaskan gold mine worth a fortune, or the cattle stampede on the Pampas?" Bod would always shake his head and look expectant, and soon enough his head would be swimming with tales of derring do and high adventure, tales of beautiful maidens kissed, of evil-doers shot with pistols or fought with swords, of bags of gold, of diamonds as big as the tip of your thumb, of lost cities and vast mountains, of steam trains and clipper ships, of pampas, oceans, deserts, and tundra. Bod walked over to the pointed stone, tall, carved with upside-down torches, and he waited, but he saw no one. He called to Alonso Jones, even knocked on the side of the stone, but there was no response. Bod leaned down, push his head into the grave, and call his friend, but instead of his head slipping through the solid matter, like a shadow passing through a deeper shadow, his head met the ground with a hard and painful thump. He called again, but saw nothing and no one, and carefully he made his way out of the tangle of greenery and of gray stones to the back of the path. Three magpies perched on a hawthorn tree took wing as he passed them. He did not see another soul until he reached the graveyard's southwestern slope, where the familiar shape of Mother Slaughter, tiny in her high bonnet and her cloak, could be seen, walking between the gravestones, head bent, looking at wildflowers. "Here, boy," she called. "There's nasturtiums growing wild over there. Why don't you pick some for me and put them over by my stone?" So Bod picked the red and yellow nasturtiums and he carried them over to Mother Slaughter's headstone, so cracked and worn and weathered that all it said now was laugh, which had puzzled the local historians for over 100 years. He put down the flowers in front of the stone respectfully. Mother Slaughter smiled at him. You're a good lad. I don't know what we'll do without you. Thank you, said Bod. Then, where is everyone? You're the first person I've seen tonight. Mother Slaughter peered at him sharply. What did you do to your forehead? She asked. I bumped it on Mr. Jones's grave. It was solid. Mother Slaughter was pursing her lips and tilting her head. Bright old eyes scrutinized Bod from beneath her bonnet. I called you boy, didn't I? That time passes in the blink of an eye. It's a young man you are now, isn't it? How old are you? About 15, I think, though I still feel the same as I always did, Bod said, but Mother Slaughter interrupted. And I still feels like I done when I was a tiny slip of a thing, making daisy chains in the old pasture. You're always you, and that don't change, and you're always changing, and there's nothing you can do about it. She sat down on her broken stone and said, I remember you the night you came here, boy. I says, we can't let the little fellow leave, and your mother agrees, and all of them starts argufying and whatnot until the lady on gray rides up. People of the graveyard, she says, listen to Mother Slaughter. You have not got any charity in your bones. And then all of them agreed with me. She trailed off, shook her head a little. There's not much happens here to make one day unlike the next. The season changes, the ivy grows, the stones fall over. But you coming here, well, I'm glad you did. That's all. She stood up and pulled a grubby piece of linen from her sleeve, spat on it, reached up as high as she could, and scrubbed the blood from Bod's forehead. There, that ought to make you look presentable, she said severely. Seeing as I don't know when the next time I'll see you is, keep safe. Feeling discomfited in a way he could not remember having felt before, Bod made his way back to the Owens' tomb and was pleased to see both of his parents waiting for him beside it. As he got closer, his pleasure turned into concern. Why did Mr. and Mrs. Owens stand like that, arranged on each side of the tomb like characters from a stained glass window? He could not read their faces. His father took a step forward and said, Evening, Bod. Trust you are keeping well. Tolerably well, said Bod, which was what Mr. Owens always said to his friends when they asked him the same question. Mr. Owens said, Mistress Owens and I spent our lives wishing that we had a child. I do not believe we could have ever had a better young man than you, Bod. He looked up at his son with pride. Bod said, Well, yes, thank you, but turned to his mother, certain he could get her to tell him what was happening. She was no longer there. Where did she go? Oh, yes, Mr. Owens seemed ill at ease. You know, Betsy, there's times when, well, you don't know what to say, you know? No, said Bod. I expect Silas is waiting for you, said his father, and then he was gone. It was past midnight. Bod began to walk toward the old chapel. The tree that grew out of the gutter on the spire had fallen in the last storm, taking a handful of slate-black roof tiles with it. Bod waited on the gray wooden bench, but there was no sign of Silas. The wind gusted. It was late on a summer's night, when the twilight lasts forever, and it was warm, but still Bod felt goose pimples rising on his arms. A voice in his ear said, Say you'll miss me, you lumpkin. Liza, said Bod. He had not seen or heard from the witch girl for over a year, not since the night of the jack of all trades. Where have you been? Watching, she said. Does the lady have to tell everything she does? Watching me? Asked Bod. Liza's voice close to his ear said, Truly, life is wasted on the living, nobody owns. For one of us is too foolish to live, and it is not I. Say you'll miss me. Where are you going? Asked Bod. Then, of course I will miss you, wherever you go. Too stupid, whispered Liza Hemstock's voice, and he could feel the touch of her hand on his hand. Too stupid to live. The touch of her lips against his cheek, against the corner of his lips. She kissed him gently, and he was too perplexed, too utterly wrong-footed to know what to do. Her voice said, I will miss you too, always. A breath of wind ruffled his hair as if It was not the touch of her hand, and then he knew, alone on the bench. He got up. Bod walked over to the chapel door, lifted the stone beside the porch, and pulled out the spare key left there by the long dead sexton. He unlocked the big wooden door without even testing to see if he could slip through it. It creaked open, protesting. The inside of the chapel was dark, and Bod found himself squinting as he tried to see. "Come in, Bod." It was Silas's voice. "I can't see anything," said Bod. "It's too dark." "Already?" said Silas. He sighed. Pod heard a velvet rustle, then a match was struck, and it flamed. It was used to light two huge candles that sat on great carved wooden candlesticks at the back of the room. In the candlelight, Pod could see his guardian standing beside a large leather chest, of the kind they called a steamer trunk, big enough that a tall man could have curled up inside and slept. Beside it was Silas's black leather bag, which Bod had seen before on a handful of occasions, but which he still found impressive. The steamer trunk was lined with whiteness. Bod put a hand into the empty trunk, touched the silk lining, touched dried earth. "Is this where you sleep?" he asked. "When I am far from home, yes," said Silas. Bod was taken aback. Silas had been here as long as he could remember, and before. "Isn't this your home?" Silas shook his head. "My house is a long, long way from here," said Silas. "That is, if it is still habitable. There have been many there have been problems in my native land, and I am far from certain that I will find on my return." "You're going back?" asked Bod. Things that had been immutable were changing. "You're really leaving? But you're my guardian." "I was your guardian, but you are old enough to guard yourself. I have other things to protect." Silas closed the lid of the brown leather trunk and began to do up the straps and buckles. "Can't I stay here, in the graveyard?" "You must not," said Silas more gently than Bod could remember him ever saying anything. "All the people here have had their lives, Bod, even if they were short ones. Now it's your turn. You need to live. Can I come with you?" Silas shook his head. "Will I see you again?" "Perhaps." There was kindness in Silas's voice, and something more. "And whether you see me or not, I have no doubt that I will see you." He put the leather trunk against the wall, walked over to the door in the far corner. "Follow me." Bod walked behind Silas, following him down the small spiral staircase to the crypt. "Took the liberty of packing a case for you," Silas explained as they reached the bottom. On top of a box of mildewed hymn books was a small leather suitcase, a miniature twin of Silas's own. "Your possessions are all in there," said Silas. Bod said, "Tell me about the honor guard, Silas. You're in it. Miss Lucas Group was. Who else? Are there a lot of you? What do you do?" "We don't do enough," said Silas, "and mostly we guard the borderlands. We protect the borders of things." "What kind of borders?" Silas said nothing. "You mean like stopping the man Jack and his people?" Silas said, "We do what we have to." He sounded weary. "But you did the right thing. I mean, stopping the Jacks. They were terrible. They were monsters." Silas took a step closer to Bod, which made the youth tilt back his head and look up into the tall man's face. Silas said, "I have not always done the right thing. When I was younger, I did worse things than a Jack, worse than any of them. I was the monster then, Bod, and worse than any monster." It did not even cross Bod's mind to wonder if his guardian was lying or joking. He knew that he was being told the truth. He said, "But you aren't that any longer, are you?" Silas said, "People can change," and then fell silent. Bod wondered if his guardian, if Silas was remembering. Then, "It was an honor to be your guardian, young man." His hand vanished inside his cloak, reappeared holding a battered old wallet. "This is for you. Take it." Bod took the wallet, but did not open it. "It contains money, enough to give you a start in the world, but nothing more." Bod said, "I went to see Alonzo Jones today, but he wasn't there. Or if he was, I couldn't see him. I wanted to tell him to tell me about the distant places he's visited, islands and porpoises and glaciers and mountains, places where people dress and eat in the strangest ways." Bod hesitated. Then, "Those places, they're still there. I mean, there's a whole world out there. Can I see it? Can I go there?" Silas nodded. There is a whole world out there, yes. You have a passport in the inner pocket of your suitcase. It's made out in the name Nobody Owens and was not easy to obtain. Bod said, if I change my mind, can I come back here? And then he answered his own question. If I come back, it will be a place, but it won't be a home any longer. Silas said, "You would you like me to walk you to the front gate?" Bod shook his head. Best if I do it on my own. Silas, if you're ever in trouble, call me. Come help. I, said Silas, do not get into trouble. No, I suppose you don't, but still. It was dark in the crypt, and it smelled of mildew and damp and old stones, and it seemed for the first time very small. Bod said, I want to see life. I want to hold it in my hands. I want to leave a footprint on the sand of the desert island. I want to play football with people. I want, he said, and then he paused and he thought, I want everything. Good, said Silas. Then he put up his hands as if he were brushing away the hair from his eyes. A most uncharacteristic gesture. He said, if ever it transpires that I am in trouble, I shall indeed send for you, even though you don't get into trouble, as you say. There was something at the edge of Silas's lips that might have been a smile, it might have been regret, it might just have been a trick of the shadows. Goodbye, then, Silas. Bod held out his hand, as he had when he was a small boy, and Silas took it. In a cold hand the color of old ivory, he shook it gravely. Goodbye, Nobody Owens. Bod picked up the little suitcase. He opened the door to let himself out of the crypt, walked back up the gentle slope to the path without looking. It was well after the gates were locked. He wondered as he reached them if the gates would still let him walk through them, or if he would have to go back to the chapel to get a key. But when he got to the entrance, he found the small pedestrian gate was still unlocked and wide open, as if it were waiting for him, as if the graveyard itself was bidding him goodbye. One pale, plump figure waited in front of the gate. She smiled up at him as he came towards her, and there were tears in her eyes in the moonlight. Hello, mother, said Bod. Mistress Owens rubbed her eyes with the knuckle, then dabbed at them with her apron. She shook her head. You know what you're going to do now? She asked. See the world, said Bod. Get into trouble, get out of trouble again. Visit jungles and volcanoes and deserts and islands and people. I want to meet an awful lot of people. Mistress Owens made no immediate reply. She stared up at him, and then she began to sing a song that Bod remembered, a song she used to sing him when he was a tiny thing, a song that she used to lull him to sleep when he was small. Sleep, my little baby, oh, sleep until you waken. When you waken, you'll see the world. If I'm not mistaken, you're not, whispered Bod, and I shall. Kiss a lover, dance a measure, find your name and buried treasure. Then the last lines of the song came back to Mistress Owens, and she sang them for her son. Face your life, its pain, its pleasure. Leave no path untaken. Leave no path untaken, repeated Bod. A difficult challenge, but I can try my best. He tried to put his arms around his mother then, as he had when he was a child, although he might as well have been trying to hold Mist, for he was alone on the path. He took a step forward through the gate that took him out of the graveyard. He thought a voice said, I am proud of you, my son. But he might, perhaps, have imagined it. The midsummer sky was already beginning to lighten in the east, and that was the way that Bob began to walk down the hill towards the living people and the city and the dawn. There was a passport in his bag, money in his pocket. There was a smile dancing on his lips, although it was a wary smile, for the world is a bigger place than a little graveyard on the hill, and there would be dangers in it, and mysteries, new friends to make, old friends to rediscover, mistakes to be made, and many paths to be walked before he would, finally, return to the graveyard, or ride with the lady on the broad back of the great gray stallion. Between now and then there was life, and Bob walked into it with his eyes and heart wide open. And that is the end of the Graveyard Book. It's a good book. You know what makes it so good is that they just don't over detail everything. You got to use your imagination for so much of it. Part of me wants to know more about every little thing, and part of me thinks that it's really good the way it is. So, I don't know. It's been fun reading to everybody. Thank you for those of you who tuned in and checked it out. I'm going to take a break. Maybe I'll start reading another book in a week or two, but until then, take care of yourselves and your families and keep reading. Good night.